after years of teaching, but to get to introduce a student, and also to claim that I had nothing whatsoever to do with this. Margaret was one of those students you just say, okay, just keep doing what you're doing. And of course she left UNC and went to George Mason, and all the people I knew teaching there said the same. And here we are tonight. And I have to just applaud this wonderful novel. And not only are you a terrific writer, but if there was an award for book tour, I mean, you know, she needs to get an award for these videos. It's been so exciting to watch you go from place to place, and they're hilarious. You're a terrific actor.
She had a dinner.
So, you know, I just would like to kick off by, I always like to hear what does inspire a work, and we'll be more specific, but maybe tell us when this novel began.
Okay, I love that. But I first want to tell Flyleaf thanks. Where'd you go, Charlie? I want to say
There,
thank you.
there she
Okay.
is.
The hospitality that this place has shown, really since we set this up months ago, has been incredible. And I'm so glad y'all are at a bookstore tonight. I think we should read every single book on the shelf before we can't, before our brains won't let us. I'm really grateful to Jill for being here, because not only she read the book a year ago, she offered her comments, she and agreed to be here tonight, and it really is dreamy. And I don't want to diminish any other reading I've done in the up to this point, but whenever I talked about where I was going, I always kind of got this glow about Chapel Hill and being with Jill. And before I answer, I'm going to answer your question, but I have a story or two I want to tell first. I got here in 1986. I pulled onto the campus of Chapel Hill, and I knew I wanted to write fiction, and I pretty quickly started looking through that course catalog and found that introductory 25W, and I knew it was an impossible class to get into. So pretty soon, like January, the second semester, I went down to Will and Jim like we used to do and stood in line at that English table and waited for that ad card. And I saw this senior I knew named Jeannie Mamu, and Jeannie had a card in her hand. She was looking at it scowling, and I said, Jeannie, what's wrong? And she said, Jill McCorkle's not teaching this class. And I said, well, I'll take it. I knew Jill, I sort of knew Jill, but only because of this, she was this publishing phenom. I was going to tell the same story about 3 years before. You had published 2 books on the same day, which has never happened since, and I don't think it had ever happened up to that point. So I swiped the card out of her hand, and I ended up in a class with Dorothy Hill. So Dorothy I really liked because she first told me, I said, I don't know what my major should be. I know I want to write. And she said, be an English major. You can adapt it to anything, you know, TV, radio, whatever. That was great advice. I was a reporter. I worked in marketing. All those things were true. And at the end of the class, she had the capacity to say, you know, who got to go on to the next level. That was why it was so important to get into that intro class. And she had this very scientific way of going down the aisles. I mean, I'm sure it was scientific. She had her little record book with our names, but she looked the last day of the semester and was like, you can go on, you can go on. And I was tapped, so very grateful to her. She said I could go on despite this next story I'm going to tell you. Did you remember this story?
I don't know.
Well, you might. She said, so Dorothy and I are talking in office hours that semester, and I had this overwhelming sense in every class, or really in these writing classes, of not knowing anyone, not having read enough, not knowing the names of these writers, and they just kept coming up, and I was really overwhelmed. And Dorothy was doing that, and she said, "Have you read Very Widely?" And I said, Very. Who wrote that? And we howled, and somehow that story got to you, because I did have Jill 3 years later, and I remember you bringing Lee Smith to class and saying, "Lee, there's Margaret. Tell her Very Widely. Tell her the story." I was like, oh my God. But I will tell you, I have shared that story so many times since, shamelessly, because it just captures a feeling of a freshman on this campus, this incredible university. And it's one reason I love the Writing and Learning Center. It's my plug tonight for the Writing and Learning Center at UNC, because that's a place where people can go get help. And I clearly I needed some help. Anyway, that is my intro to
but
how
I think you also just accurately described how everyone feels going into any class. What I feel every time I come to this store. Oh my God!
Right.
Look at what I have not read.
That's exactly right. It doesn't bother me as much, but it was a real feeling for a while. Just feeling like I had some catching up to do.
Well, maybe your next book is Very Widely.
I've thought about it. It's
or
been,
the short story.
Some mock titles. But I guess you want to talk. So should I read any, or do you want to? Let's start talking.
Well, do you want to just tell?
I'll give a little intro,
like just a tiny bit about the origin, and then yes, I definitely want them to hear you read.
Okay. So the origin story. The very first inkling I had that this could be a story was really living in Washington, D.C., and knowing about this condominium complex called McLean Gardens. And it was, red brick and grassy and really lovely. And I had been there. We had friends who lived there. I had seen the interior, could imagine it. And then I learned that the whole thing was built by the government in the early 40s for women to come there and work during the war. And I thought, that's a lot of women, and that's a big deal, for these women to get on their buses and trains and come to DC from their little farms. And what a heady time that must have been. Just, the autonomy and the economic independence, and they had their own money, and surely there were a couple men left. We could come up with some drama. And there was some built-in tension, because the war was not going to last forever. It was, it was going to, that opportunity for women that's fragile was going to be yanked away. And so I thought I had some built-in tension. And I had been to McLean Gardens, and my first little image was of a woman curled up in a window, smoking, regretting her hasty decision to marry somebody she didn't know very well. And I guess that's still a little bit in this book. But I did not have a story. I really had nothing. I mean, E.L. Doctorow, that quote about, driving at night,
yes.
with your lights on in the fog at night, you can only see as far as your lights. And I pretty much did it the whole way like that.
But that place,
the
place is what inspired. And so that then led you to this time in history that you had to research, or
I had to do a lot of research. I'm not a historian, so I did not know a lot. And I started reading. The first thing I read was, and I won't tell you everything I read. We could be here all night. But the one thing was really foundational, and it sort of matters for the book a little bit. It's David Brinkley's Washington Goes to War. And that there's a newscaster in If You Leave, and there's some similarities. He's from North Carolina. So then there was the Pentagon, Steve Vogel, that was a big book. I read New Yorker stories about homes for unmarried mothers. there were movies. The More the Merrier was a really fun one. I tried to make it fun, but I would go down these rabbit holes. And because it's a great form of procrastination. And there's a scene, I'm going to read an early scene, but there's a surgeon in the book, Ben. He ultimately performs an appendectomy. And so because I lived in DC, I could go to the National Library of Medicine and I watched these videos from the 1930s of surgeons performing appendectomies. And I got that right. So if anybody here tonight is having any symptoms, and you don't mind being cut open, because you don't have to be cut open today, but I could probably help. But I kept telling myself that I don't have to get it right, because it's fiction. It's made up.
But you did get,
Well,
you did the research, and the details are stunning of that time.
A lot of fact checking that I'm not sure it really paid off, but
well, but I think it does, because I think we entered this world and we totally believe.
Yeah, well, that's the intent. You don't want it to weigh it down. I wanted it to be character driven. I didn't want it to just be this historical set piece. So it's a balance, But there's this thing called the internet, and it just kept growing, and I kept going in and searching, and it's a trap.
Well, read.
Yeah. Okay. So I am hearing from some people who finished it, but I'm still going to read something from the beginning in case you haven't started it. So this is a story about two women, Audrey and Lucille, who moved to Washington. Audrey comes from Virginia. Lucille comes from North Carolina. And they are working, and they become friends. And by the end of the war, their lives are very entangled. One of them leaves her child with the other to raise. So that's something you kind of know from the outset. But this scene is Audrey and Lucille have not yet met. She is getting ready to meet someone else. She shouldn't have been surprised that the party was almost all women, taffeta and rouge everywhere. Only women worked in her office. But now in her co-worker Irene's grand home, or rather Irene's parents' home, at a party replete with bourbon and scotch, trays of celery and olives and cheese, she hoped to meet at least a few men. Irene greeted her warmly, but then turned back to a blue-clad Navy man. Making an introduction there would risk losing his attention. Audrey's roommate called this the government girls' 8-to-1 etiquette. She also used it as an excuse not to tag along tonight. Audrey should have insisted, but she knew invitations to parties, especially ones for women, were rationed like everything else. To avoid looking lonely, she filled a plate and stepped onto the side terrace, smelling the new earth that the rain had turned up. Wet black pavement, streetlights flickering, the gleam of chrome on passing cars. All around was novelty. This was what she had loved about leaving her small Virginia hometown and moving here, where trees grew in sidewalks and voices sang out around pianos, as with a bluesy cow-cow boogie now. She didn't really mind there was no one interesting to talk to. She wouldn't stay long. Looking over the garden, she plotted a night scene like this, darkness yielding up its own shade of indigo, the sharp whiff of oil from the asphalt, like her tubes of paint. And then the scent of tobacco. She smelled him first, his cigarette that he threw down before she heard his footsteps up the walkway. A slight hush at the piano as everyone sighted a man at the door. If it had been a woman, the music might have grown louder. She turned to see a half-dozen women plucking at his coat and chirping all around him. A painting on the wall drew her back inside, a woman alone in a cafe booth. Highlights in her hair, the same flecks of creamy yellow in her necklace. All of it was painted with an intentional flatness. It was modern that way, along with the square frame. Nothing was modern about this home, or its owner, she suspected, but modernity crept in anyway. You want to know what she's thinking about, a voice said behind her, and I want to know what you're thinking about. She might have given a little jump. How had he shaken loose so quickly? I think you just answered your own question. Lucky guess, he said. His smile lingered, his hair was dark, slicked back. How do you know our host? I don't. The lights were on, I saw a table set with food. A fella's got to eat, isn't that what they say? He was a funny one, but she wouldn't give him a laugh, not yet. I know Irene's family, he went on. It's true I came for the food. She's got dull friends, but splendid presentations like this, and I happen to know you're not one of her friends. They looked over to Irene. Oh, really? We're new friends. I work with her. She recognized others from the office, Beatrice, Mabel, and Constance, who was ashing her cigarette into a palm plant. That I would believe, he said. They say you can't choose your family, but you also can't choose who you work with. No, if you were Irene's old friend, you'd be wearing a fitted jacket and some kind of skirt. They all talked beforehand about what they would wear and how they would style their hair. He was gangly, but made an elegant little box step as he talked. You're from somewhere else. That's the first true thing you said. I knew if I kept talking, I'd get something right. You should get some food, too, since that's why you came. What keeps you here when so many men have left? The term lesser men came to mind, the ones the war didn't want. Nothing will much longer, he said, filling his plate. I've just been commissioned as a surgeon. She was starting to warm to him, could almost see herself encircled by his open, gesticulating arms until he said that. A surgeon, too eager to cut, all of them. I'm ruining the shrimp for you, aren't I? Just the mention of the word surgery does that. It's my mother who's had quite a lot of interaction with surgeons, and none of them have done her much good. But don't look so glum, she laughed. It isn't like you're her surgeon. I'm sure you've got a better record than those old sawbones. He cringed. We all do our best. And you, a war transplant, coordinating the shipment of life-saving supplies, making sure everyone is paid on time. Something like that. In a dark, dank basement, I repair film. Reels of it confiscated from the Axis. A lot of it boring, but now and then we come across something disturbing. You're not so unlike a surgeon after all. She couldn't think of a thing to reply. She felt the beady eyes of the other women in the room. I was just leaving when I noticed the painting. It's been lovely meeting you. Have we met? You still haven't told me your name. Audrey. Audrey, leaving so soon? Let me, Ben, at least give you a lift home. But I'd be cutting the party short for you. If I want to come back, I will. How's that? Let's go out another door. I wouldn't want to stir up any animosity for taking you away. You know an exit route? I never go anywhere without one. She led him to the terrace, and he climbed down the brick side, then offered his hands to help her. His car's interior smelled like leather. The seats were burgundy. He asked about her mother, but she waved away the question. I don't know how doctors manage. All that suffering you see, and you can't feel any of it. When he asked about her work, she said she had a degree in studio art. Her professor had told her about the job. I wouldn't have taken you for an artist. Maybe it's the high heels, your neat dress. I'd like to see your work someday. She blushed at that, hoping he didn't notice in the dark car. She could have asked him in, but didn't know what was proper. Would the front parlor be empty? What if it was? Who might see them, and would they care? They stayed in the car. He was 30, older than he looked. He said both his parents were deceased. He'd never been close to his younger brother. The singularity surprised her. Maybe it was his effortless smile, his stance of open legs and animated arms. When the rain subsided, they set out together from the car to the portico, fat raindrops starting again. Your hair, he said, lifting his hand to touch it, then pulling away, his only tentative move of the night. She blushed again. She knew he meant the rain might ruin her hair, but she felt his gesture for days afterward, like a kiss.
Good choice. Good choice of scenes. And there is humor in the dialogue throughout, which I think comes naturally to you.
Good.
Good. You know it does. But I'm also so interested in your study of the roles of women over time. So, you know, in this time span,
Right.
a lot of things happen
Right.
in terms of being a woman in
Right.
this country.
Yeah.
Did you, I mean, whether you intended or not, it is an important part
It is.
of the novel. And so I thought maybe you could talk
Yeah.
a little bit about that.
So, you know, I did set it close to the end of the war in 44 because I didn't want them to taste this sort of stability for too long, you know, and so that's the start. I also wanted to, we go to 73 in the book. 74, you know, I could remember 73. I kind of wanted to write into something I could remember. But 74 was Nixon's resignation, and that always seemed like a turning point to me. And of course, 73, the final scenes in the book are right after or at Nixon's inauguration. And there's a little Easter egg at the very end. You know, the next day after Nixon's inaugurated, Roe v. Wade is passed. And so that is hovering over this story. It's not, you know, that's the arc, right, of this time period. It also, you know, there was the treatment of unmarried mothers was a different time. You know, from what I understand, the first part of the century, institutions like the Florence Crittenden homes, which Pennington is loosely based on, their intent was really to reform mothers, you know, these mothers who had strayed in some way. But their intent was to keep the child with the mother. And that really changed as the war ended. And there are a lot of things that probably conspired to make that happen. But until the mid-70s, you know, that was a thing. And so that also hovers over the book. It's set in D.C. where there's some, you know, in the background, there's some, you know, the March in Washington is happening in 73. There are things going on. Now, some of these characters are more myopic than others. So, in their flawed way.
Very timely.
Yeah. It's a really rich period.
Perhaps more timely than you realized when you began writing it.
Yes. I had finished realizing how relevant it was.
Yeah. It's but the whole topic of motherhood. I mean, for you know, that's such a difficult place in this. Just the whole exploration of an ambivalent mother.
Right.
And yet keeping us, you know, how to say it, still keeping our sympathy
Right.
for the mother.
Right.
And to take on that kind of conflict was very difficult. Was that something primary in the idea?
I mean, it was definitely, you know, I did a lot of, like I said, without a story, a lot of scene setting and research, and then was really reading about men who, you know, no greater sacrifice, right? So all these men they're dying for their country, they're dying for their brother. Of course, I was realizing, you know, not every man wanted to do that. I mean, I would read about enlisted men who would get on ships and they'd take away their ties and belts because they were worried about self-harm. So not every man wanted to live up to that male ideal, right? Or could, or, you know, this courage and valor thing. So I wasn't going to write about that, but I was like, well, what's the comparable sacrifice for women? And I was a mother, so, you know, this occurred to me. I was a contented mother, but I thought, well, what if you resisted that with your whole body? You know, what would that look like? And it turns out both of these women, in, you know, their own ways, do resist. Then it became, well, it was about taking on roles, you know, that you didn't normally have to take on. And so it was about what if, you know, well, let's take Lucille. She starts out really wanting to be a mother, and her life does not track that way. And Audrey wants to be a painter. We don't really know if she's any good. That's what she wants. She ends up sort of forced into this role. But she has some qualities that make her a really good mother. You know, she's very grounded, she's very stable. One of the early epigraphs to this book was The Beginning of Spring, the Penelope Fitzgerald book. And there's a beautiful line in it that says, life makes its own corrections. And it's not there now, but there's a seed of that in here about, you know, maybe, are we really the best judges of how our lives turn out? Or what happens when our strengths and our desires don't really match up? So I was just thinking about all of it. And do you really have to want to be a mother to be a good one? You know? Right. And it is a book about choices, but well, I don't want to get preachy, but you know.
Well, and also, I don't want to give away too much, but the jacket copy.
Right,
lets
tells you a
know.
lot, yeah.
Tells you a lot there.
Yeah.
But it's very moving, and I was thinking a lot about the daughter and the way she plays in, and of course wondering about your point of view choices, which and I know there are a lot of writers here in the room. I'm always curious about those choices of which points of view, and how long. You've already done a beautiful job, kind of setting up the timeline, because where it ends is at such a pivotal moment. But talk a little bit about getting to know these characters and choosing who
gets
the time.
I kind of felt like there was a moment when Lake had a point of view. She does not in this version, but it ultimately hers got cut and others didn't, because I really was not as interested in sort of the child's point of view in this story. I feel like that's been told in literature a little, more, or privileged. And so has the mother who walks away. I think that is a little, we have that is represented fairly well. I thought without Lucille's point of view, she does have a significant point of view, but we needed it so she wouldn't be vilified. But Audrey was the one who was most interesting to me, because she is the reluctant hero in a way. She's not, she's very flawed, but she does what she does what she doesn't want to do. And I was curious about that. I don't think that story gets told as much. So that's why we start with Audrey. I think there were maybe 4 chapters before we get to Lucille. And then I think it's really, I was playing with, who has the information. The reader knows a lot more than the characters as they go along. And there's some frustration in that. But I think we're all of us operating on low information all the time. And I think that's really significant. And I try to remember that when I'm, watching what's going on in relationships. We don't really know. And so I have a lot of sympathy for all the, characters. And Ben he gets a little bit, but that's because I had written that appendectomy scene and I wasn't cutting that one. No, but that scene, there is, it's fruitful in a way. There's a metaphor that kind of comes out of that scene that I thought was important for the book. So that's really why it stayed in there.
And I think the choice about the daughter was probably a difficult one, but a wise one, given the way you go back and forth between Lucille and Audrey. And she's not vilified, which I think when you take the time to fully round a character. So have you missed them? I was once on a panel where the question was asked of writers, when you finish a book, what happens to these people? And it split right down the middle. Half of the panel said when a book is done, they're gone. And the other half is like, oh no, I hear from them. So I'm wondering about your leaving them.
Right. I haven't heard from anybody yet. But I do, if I were to open up this book today and start, I can read this scene and it stays pretty contained. But, if I were to go back in there, I'd start envisioning something else, and so now it has these covers on it, and I can't do that. So what is the point? I don't want to go back in there. I also think the magic of a book is that now each of you gets to go in there and interact and bring your memory and your imagination and your expectations. And for each of you, in any book, it's a whole new thing. It's a whole new thing. And that, there's a time for that, So I'm excited about that kind of dynamism. It doesn't have to be my dynamism. I'm kind of out of it,
No, reading is a very creative art.
Bringing
sure.
I think you bring your whole self
You-
to it. And
You do indeed.
Yeah.
What about the art?
the art.
Because you do such a great job creating these workspaces. And I know that is the writer Amy Hempel. That's a prompt she gives all the time, in stories is, well, what does this person do?
Right.
Because a career or a talent comes with its own language
Right.
and details. So I'm always curious about the workplaces.
Right. Well, I mean, the women had come to Washington to work, so that really was always going to be a part of it. There is an irony, that it is a very domestic novel too. It's not about the workplace. There's a lot of camaraderie in the workplace, which I think is, a personal side of work. But I think that, the art, let's just go back to UNC for a minute, because I was reading Flannery O'Connor, whose sentences I loved, and then reading her essays, and she said, well, if you want to write, you should draw. You should look at a thing very closely. You should observe it, stare. Really, any discipline is good for writing, but drawing and painting. And she says that more than once. So I had no aptitude or inclination at all as a kid, but after college, I thought, well, okay, Flannery says this, I'll try it. And I liked the process, and I did start dabbling in it. There was a point in writing this book where I was like, okay, Margaret, you can only do one thing that doesn't make any money. You can't really do two, so we're going to put this aside. And we're going to make Audrey an artist so I could live vicariously through her. And, so that was fun. It was a fun way to get to know my first piece of research was for that, because I had to procrastinate some more, was to read Daybook by Anne Truitt, and that was a phenomenal book about being an artist. I got about a third of the way through that book, and the character was becoming Anne Truitt, and the only thing I knew about this artist before I started was that she lived in DC, and her timeline was exactly the same as Audrey's. So I thought, well, I'll learn something about the DC art scene and I'll be able to write about it better. That really wasn't the case, but I was taken with this character's sensibility, and I was writing scenes about, well, she was nearsighted, so maybe my artist needs to be nearsighted. And she had seen this chicken's head beheaded, come off as a kid, and it really affected her. And I think, Carter, I'm gonna have a scene with, Audrey's watching a chicken's head come off, and he finally was like, Margaret, you need to stop reading this book. You are obsessed with Anne Truitt. So I put the book down, but then a year later, it was not long afterward, I was with a friend, and we walked into Susan Shreve's house. Susan was my mentor at George Mason. She had been married to Tim Seldes, who was Eudora Welty's agent and many people's. And he had worked behind her house in the studio. And he had passed away recently. And we said, Susan, we'll bring some writers and we'll write here every day and keep you company. And she said, that is a great idea. And, that was Anne Truitt's studio. Right back there. So that was like a squeeze of the hand. The spirit is with me writing this book, and a few years later her work was exhibited. She died. She was a sculptor who would take these wood columns and sand them, 40 layers of paint over them, sanding between each layer of acrylic paint. You could not see a brushstroke, and they were these columns that you walked around. They're really stunning. Everybody should know her work. She's just fabulous. So when the book was finished, then my reward was to go back and read this from start to finish. And she has a scene toward the end of the book where she is approaching her adult daughter. And Jill has a little bit of experience with this because you just recently became a grandmother, So Aunt Trude that's getting ready to happen, and she's looking at this daughter just with lots of anxiety of this child, and she's going to have to watch her child suffer, and that is the worst. It's so awful. And she says, wait a minute, I can't take on the suffering of my children. She says, Mother, stop it. Mothers can only stand. And that's a line from a Latin hymn, Mother Standing. It's about Mary at the foot of the cross. And I read that and I thought, okay, that's my epigraph right there. And that became like the perfect endpoint. So you asked about art and workplace, but we're at the epigraph. But I do, it's a very meaningful, sort of, it's not a definition of motherhood, but it certainly comes through in this book.
Definitely. And as you said, I mean, we all bring our own ideas to the theme. I don't know how we're doing. Do you want to read another little bit?
Mm-hmm.
Like the Library of Congress. Mm-hmm. Speaking of workplace, a bathroom scene. How are we doing?
So we're good.
We're good. Thank you.
Are we good on me reading? Yeah. Is that what he's saying?
Yes.
All right. Let's see if I can find this.
Bathroom scenes are always.
Okay. I did not mark those, but here we go. So Audrey works in the cellar of the Library of Congress because there's film that they're taking care of, and it needs to be, it's flammable. So it's dark and not pleasant down there. And it's lunchtime, and these women want to get out. No one dared suffer the heat outdoors where it felt hot enough for the film to go up in flames. Instead, everybody headed for the restroom upstairs with its bright light, marble and terrazzo floor, and walls almost as cool as their basement office. This restroom also had a pea green leatherette couch in case someone wanted to take a nap, which Audrey had done more than once in the last month. They kicked off their shoes and draped their hosiery and dresses carefully on hangers. Beatrice stood in the mirror, repinning her wilted curls, and Mabel sprinkled talcum on her chest and arms. In their long white slips, they repaired to the larger space of the bathroom, the spotless, gleaming bathroom of all places, where they lay on the floor or leaned against cold radiators and windowsills in chilly laboratories, pulling their sandwiches from wax paper wrapping, and ate. Constance ate faster than everyone else, eager to light her cigarette, but politely she waited till the rest were done. And then they all smoked, the added heat of their flaming matchsticks be damned. That's a little piece.
Yeah, that's great. Such great.
And that was, someone I knew who had interviewed women in the IRS building. And she had a lot of great detail about it. But I think that really happened. They would lounge on the floor of the bathroom.
I love that.
As soon as I read
the whole
that,
scene. Yeah. So did anything surprise you? I mean, the whole studio connection.
Right.
I mean, that's wonderful.
Yeah, that was a happy
there.
surprise. I mean, I guess I didn't, I was really hooked on this motherhood thing, and I did not think about the friendship as intentionally, and that sort of what happens in that friendship, and sort of, I guess it didn't surprise me, but I wasn't expecting it as much. I think for women, female friendships can be just incredibly life-sustaining. And when they go awry, it is a real grief. And this one goes off the rails. Right. And it's, they have these expectations of each other, right? And even Audrey, has some expectations. And I think about that. Is that the root of, failure for a friendship? But I'm really interested in forgiveness and what that looks like over a long period of time. I don't think it's a lightning bolt. So I wanted to write into that and, explore if these two could get to solid ground, then, gosh, anything is possible. I don't know. The reader has to decide, but that it is, I guess it surprises me the way it's speaking to readers. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is there something we haven't said yet that you want to?
Well, I guess it's, it is a book about choices, and I guess, well, another thing that kind of surprised me, when we make choices, it looks like there are a lot of choices being made in this book. But when I kind of wrote into them, I realized like a lot of this feels very compulsory to these characters. And, they act out, you see them making decisions about that core compulsion, but we don't really, a lot of it, they're very boxed in. And I realized, especially with Ben's character, I think, when people don't have choice, we think, oh, well, they just made a poor decision, they, bad on them, they have to face the consequences. But what we forget is that everybody around them suffers. And I see that, and, in Ben's life, and everybody, it's just, we forget that. So I like to think about that. I think about it when it looks like everyone's so calculating. But the ultimate choice is really to love. I mean, for these mothers,
Yes. And, I mean, you can always tell a novel driven by a topic. And
right.
that is not happening in this novel. I mean, it's clear that what is topical and timely grew out of the lives of very specific individuals.
Right.
That's how I would say it. So that's why I was curious. You were making some choices
Right.
before they were as timely as they are
That's right.
now with the Roe v. Wade, everything.
And everything.
And it just sort of naturally, organically grew out of, again, that image. I love that you started with this image of the place
Right.
and a woman in the window.
Right. Woman in a window.
Kind of like Faulkner with the little girl up the tree, is, those are powerful images.
Yeah. You do. And sudden, that just,
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't know what that was for a long time.
Did
but-
you have interest in the 40s prior to that? That's not. So no. So
No.
it was all about learning the history of that place. It's wonderful. Are there questions out there? Oh, yes, right here.
On the front row.
Do you need the mic?
I have like 18 questions.
Catherine does not need a mic.
But give her a mic. I have so many questions, and I've talked to Margaret about this book in depth. But two things come to mind just now. One of my favorite quotes of Flannery O'Connor, and I did not know that that's who inspired your art, is something like, in the end, a people will be remembered not by their dates and statistics, but by the stories they tell. This is an amazing story. I mean, it is so unbelievable, and the characters and everything. And then, Jill, when you were just asking about interest in the 40s, I remember being at your house a few years back. I mean, she had on a timeline written, Carter lets her draw on the walls. she had a timeline of like what the clothing looked like, what the train cars, the street cars looked like. I mean, she got to know this era. Anyway, but we've heard a lot tonight, and I've read the book. I have that advantage, but we've heard a lot about DC, and it is a great setting. But there's also a lot, since we're here in Chapel Hill, Lucy, you go back to Lucille's home and you get a good feel of North Carolina. So can you talk about how you tried to, it takes place in New York, in DC, but there's still a very southern feel that you feel very familiar in a lot of these settings, having those of us who are from the South.
Yeah.
Great question.
Thank you.
Somebody just sent a list to me of all the Southern funny words in a text, like lollygagging and ragamuffin and all, so there's that. I mean, that probably adds something. I always was enchanted. Well, it's a fictional place, Pomona, or as I made it up, but it is a real place name near Greensboro. And it means, there was a nursery there, and I knew that historically, that there was an old nursery, and the dates don't line up at all. I mean, this nursery is from like the 1850s. By the 1950s, it was more of a, a company, kind of terracotta town. But it was before that, this nursery, and I was always enchanted with that idea that Pomona, the goddess of fruit trees, I'm sure that's why they called it Pomona, as this sort of fertile place that Lucille would be from. And I wanted it to be a place you couldn't really visit, because DC is so on the map, and you know every corner, and you can visit every bathroom in the Library of Congress, which I recently did. But I wanted this to be a little mythological. Lucille really, it's pretty mythological to her, I think. And I wanted it to be just a place you could only visit in your imagination. I don't know if that answers your question.
But there's a feel of maybe some of those phrases that people send you. I mean, you definitely get a feel of the South and women from the South in DC. It's a good balance.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up here. It's in my blood, in my bones.
Great question. Are there other questions?
Margaret, can you tell us about the cover of the book? Who did the
Good
cover?
question, Cece. So the publisher does their covers. They don't really let you do them. I'm not saying I could have, but they do a lot of collaboration, which was a really fun part of the process, because I got to look at, I've got to think about it. What covers do I like? What do I see? What would I do? And they did. They listened to me. I said I wanted color. I was really worried they would put it in black and white, and because it was historical from the 40s. And I wanted the human touch. I wanted brushstroke, and they did that. And then I had the idea of an unfinished portrait, and they kind of ran with that. So I feel like I sort of designed it. I don't have a credit on there or anything, but it was fun. It was fun to work with them about that. And it's really a nice, their covers are all pretty great.
No, it's great. I love the portrait.
Yeah.
Is it one of Audrey's portraits?
Is it one of Audrey's portraits? Yeah, I mean, it's of Lake. So, I mean, the idea is just that she's not, Audrey has not yet finished being her mother. I mean, there is this, or living out her motherly role. I mean, I think for both Lucille and Audrey, there's a moment in the book where they have to really own it. And that's what we're kind of working toward the whole way. And so, yeah, I guess Lucille couldn't have done this. Although Lucille has sort of an artistic temperament. I mean, there's a line where Audrey says, I wonder what she could do. So, I don't know.
Another novel.
Another
Maybe that's a question if I'm not jumping in on anyone like what, because there's a lot of time between finishing a book and then,
there's
I
been a
can't
lot of time
imagine you're doing
since-
a whole lot of writing on this
Well,
book tour.
Right.
because-
I mean, not this fall, but up until this fall. And always, I love
Yeah.
short fiction, so I've always written short stories. And I see them, some have not been written, some I'm working on now, and some have been written. But a novel and stories? I mean, Jill's last work was interconnected stories in a beautiful way. I would not call it a novel, but anyway, this will be, I hope it has a novel arc. It also spans a long period of time from 1950 to the present. And I think it's gonna be a little weirder. The speculative thing, it's gonna be a little stranger. So I'm really excited to
Good,
get
well,
back to it.
that's exciting.
Yeah.
No, I mean, because what
This
you,
is
what
so
you
grounded in
chose
reality.
with this one automatically, set the limits.
Right. That's right. and that was fun.
Yeah,
But now it's time to do something else.
that's exciting. And also that you can have stories that potentially have a life.
Of their own, and you won't have to wait.
Yeah, great.
That'd be great.
Oh, good. I love hearing what you're working on.
Yeah.
Other questions? Yes, David.
So when you start writing fiction, you're confronted with this idea of write what you know. You can either reject that, or it can guide you, or you can have some complicated relationship with it. I just wonder, once you started with this novel, what was your relationship to that kind of mantra? I do not think my life is very interesting. So I'm really curious about anybody else. So, and that's why I think I went to this resistance for this mother thing. Like, what would that feel like? I mean, I really wanted to know. I wanted to live into that. So I'm not a big fan of writing what you know. I mean, it would be, I think, of course, there's a lot of me in this book, and it gets in there, but that's not what interests me. I'm not trying to sort, my own stories, or I don't know. I
But
love that
words like
question, though.
lollygag are there in your mind.
Right. I mean, I'm a sponge, and I'm observing and soaking up everything around me, but I'm really curious about the other people. And I mean, the first thing I wrote in one of the first things I wrote in graduate school was about some medieval mystic. I mean, you think I knew, but that's what I was really curious about. So, good question.
It is a good question. Did you guys cross paths in
We
DC?
did.
I was going to say,
Oh yeah.
you've traversed Chapel Hill, DC.
We were in the same writing class with Doris Betts.
Okay.
And then years later, we hadn't kept in touch, and we stared at each other at church, and we said, wait a minute.
We did. It was a great moment. I mean, David had been in Doris Betts' class with him,
Okay.
or I had been in class with him. And we went to the same church, and it's been a wonderful friendship over the years. It really has been.
And Julia's here. How many writers in the red? There are a lot of writers in this.
Raise your hand.
And I think about Doris Betts a lot too. She had said one time in class, I think you're kind of an impatient writer. And I just want to say to Doris, honey, look at this. They haven't got you. But she was, incredible. And I had her also, anyway, we could reminisce for days, but.
3 minutes. So time for one more question. Yes.
I was wondering, as you were doing all this historical research, if there was anything that you came across in that research that truly surprised you that you didn't know before. Right?
Yeah.
Other than the appendix.
Right. Well, I could not believe that scientists did not really understand when a woman ovulated until like 1929 or 1930. I mean, that is so, that didn't even understand. Think about that, how close we are to that period of not having any, sense, control. So that surprised me.
Something you told me that is in the book, that women, they did not make maternity clothes for working women.
Right. Yeah.
Till then.
Yeah, that's true. There was not a lot of, at 6 or 7 months, you just stayed at home. You didn't go anywhere. I mean, that was, which I'm not sure exactly what that was about, just the general shame that you had conceived, but yeah, they didn't really have a market.
Well, that was the whole Lucy and Ricky thing.
Right.
They couldn't use the word pregnant, and they had these twin beds, so go figure how it all happened.
Still, it's back in my head.
there's a, no, but that's a wonderful example too of what grew out of their characters, this exploration of womanhood
Right.
through this time, which, I mean, I could imagine a women's studies, you know, I mean, because it is a wonderful little time
Yes.
capsule.
Snippet of the 20th century for sure. That we forget.
Charlie, how we doing?
We are just about at time.
I think Margaret also has a lot of
36
books to sign. So, Margaret,
So much fun.
what a pleasure.
Yeah. That's just and I just want to say thank you to each and every one of you who's in the seat. It means a lot. To see you here.
And to Carter.
Oh wait, no, this is going to be the new tradition. Last Saturday, we all applauded him. He's been the cameraman. He's like shown up. He's gone to everything.
I know, it's amazing.
I mean, there
And
was
it is intimidating after watching all your videos. I dressed up just in case. I had on my vest and I'm like, no, I can't wear this tonight. I better dress up.
so great. Oh, thank you. Okay.
Oh, terrific. You do such a great job. Oh, thank you. No, listen. And oh my
The goal was that we're just doing well. And that was powerful. She had a, it started with like, I need to show us Carolina. She learned, like, and then I was like,